always think you're gonna walk on stage and feel fine, but it doesn't happen. Never happens. There's always that adrenaline, that fear. But you know what? You get addicted to it, and you, by the by, you grab that fear and you let it fuel you. You let it drive you. And that's pretty much the gist of my, my talk today. So picture a 6-7-year-old kid in the cold city of Prague. He had been ordered to go to bed, and him being the only boy in the family amongst 3 other sisters, his mother couldn't but spoil him, you know, the only child, the only boy. His father was not like that. His father was a huge man, and he stood in stark contrast to anything and everything that little boy was. His father was a successful businessman, as you can imagine. He'd naturally want his son to be an exact image of him, both in stature and in character. So back to the little child, snug in bed. And whether he genuinely felt thirsty or he just missed that motherly love he had been so accustomed to, all of a sudden he started shouting, "Mother, water! Mother, water!" And next he knew, his father stormed in, fuming with anger. He grabbed that little child from underneath the sheet. He opened a little door to a balcony that was in the child's room. He flung him there violently and locked the door and left. I picture that child shivering with cold and terror through the night. Oh yeah, he did spend the whole night there. And that incident stuck in the mind and heart of that child for life. And we know that because 30 years later, he sat down and he wrote it down, that story, in great detail. It was a letter he was writing to his father, who had asked him why he felt that his son was so estranged, why his son was distancing himself from him. And so he wanted to answer him and say, "Well, if you don't like who I am today, perhaps because you messed me up. If you think I lack the capacity for empathy today, perhaps that night was cold enough to kill the very empathy in me." And he folded that letter. And even then, as a 36-year-old young man, he couldn't face his father and look him in the eye and confront him. He gave the letter to his mother and begged her to give the letter to her husband, to his father. The mother read the letter, and we don't know whether she took pity on her husband, or she took pity on the child, or both, or she feared that the letter would widen the gap between the two, but she read it, folded it, and gave it back to the son. And the father never knew the answer to his question. What a tragedy. Now, I'd wager some of you might relate to that story, to that kid in a way or another. I certainly do. But I think you can't do much with childhood traumas. They could help you navigate. If you go back to the past, and walk back to your childhood, they could help you navigate those traumas, but never uproot them altogether. I don't think traumas can be uprooted, They help you connect the dots and figure out why you have certain tendencies, why you're messed up in a way or another. But that's about it. At other times, the feeling of alienation, the feeling of being detached, not knowing who you really are or what you're going to do with your life, has nothing to do with childhood. Perhaps you've had a perfect childhood, but you happen to be born into unusual circumstances, and that's a different story. That's the story of Amal. I met Amal in the summer of 2018. I had a summer camp, an English summer camp going on in the heart of the Reef Mountains. It was a program sponsored by US embassy here in Rabat. And the kids, the teenagers, were supposed to have fun, experience a variety of workshops and improve their English language skills. So I, as a manager of that summer camp, I had to hunt for individuals, workshop counselors who would conduct something fun for the kids and be English speakers at the same time. And all of a sudden, I see this Facebook post. This woman was conducting a poetry workshop for some kids in a place called Muqarisat for the benefit of some association there. I wrote her a message and said, could you please replicate that which you're doing with our Riffian teenagers? She said, of course. She spoke beautiful English, perfect British accent. So I drove there, I met her. She had a full Islamic abaya and hijab on. Okay, I picked her up and we drove back to the Rif. And that was the start of one of my best friendships, one of the very few spiritually driven friendships I've ever had. Amal Matil. She was born in Holland, born and raised in Holland. Her father had immigrated there years before he met her mother. And she had two beautiful young daughters. And I could never understand her feeling of estrangement, I don't know, I cannot describe the way she was, but she was always at a loss. She felt as though she never belonged anywhere, Back in Holland, she was a brown, African, Muslim, veiled, lady. And in here, she was a Zmagria, right? And, you can just imagine, I could never put myself in her shoes because how could I? She was born into the European culture and spent her whole life there. She was 52 when I met her. But she couldn't have felt further removed from Europe. And she would crave Morocco like I've never seen anything like it before. She would suck the joy out of every little experience. She would a cup of mint tea by the sea. She would drive down to TEDxUIR and attend the festival. And, those little things that we overlook and we don't even see because we're born into them. We're accustomed to them. We take them for granted. And yet, she couldn't feel home here either. Perhaps none put it better than the Swedish Academy upon granting the wonderful Zanzibari-born novelist Abdurrazzaq Gurna in 2021. So when they graced him with that prize, they issued a statement and they said something like, we celebrate Abdurrazzaq Gurna for his uncompromised penetration to the lives of those who dwell in the great gulf between cultures and continents, those who occupy that third space, 1 foot here and 1 foot there. That was Amal. And so in the summer of 2021, I was on my way out the house, about to embark on a very unique trip. And just as I was putting on my jacket, I got a WhatsApp message from Amal saying, hey Mo, she used to call me Mo, I need to talk to you. I said, you're not gonna believe where I'm going right now. She said, where? I said, I'm going to Dakhla on a motorcycle from Tétouan. It's a 4,000 kilometers trip. First, I was so excited, you can imagine. I said, okay, we can talk later. I said, I promise as soon as I get there, it's gonna take me 2 days, I'll catch up with you. I never did. And I don't even want to give myself excuses. But I never did reach out to her, even after I got back home in Tétouan. And a week later, I got a message from a friend we had in common saying that Amal had had the big C, cancer, and she passed away. I reached out to Amira, her eldest, and she confirmed the news. And boy, I sobbed like I had never sobbed before. I wanted that last conversation, and I'm gonna have to live with that remorse for the rest of my life. But she was fine though, knowing the woman she truly was, I know she did fine. She traveled the world, she taught, she wrote beautiful poetry. She danced, she laughed, she cried, in grief and in bliss. And she had two beautiful mini-her who carry her legacy today. So I know she did well. But the point I'm making is whatever it is that you're going through, couldn't have been worse than the feeling of estrangement that she felt. Whatever it is, you could use that to your advantage. You could use that to fuel and drive you, just like I spoke about the fear of stage fright before. Just like that little boy I told you about earlier did. Because that boy, he suffered a lot, but he grew up to be one of the most prominent authors of the 20th century. He influenced such writers as Albert Camus, Garcia Marquez. That little boy was Franz Kafka. And had he not gone through what I've told you and more, I am sure beyond doubt that you would have never read The Metamorphosis, right? Or The Trial, or any of his other masterpieces. You wouldn't have recognized his name today. So you use that which torments you to drive you and fuel you. And if you think it's brave to end it all, it's not. What's courageous and what's brave is to stand erect and face it all. I don't know why I remember Shakespeare's King Lear. I don't know if you've read the play or not, but he stood out there in that raging storm and he said, "Bring it on." Well, he didn't say bring it on, but he said something like, "Blow your wind and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow. Singe my white head." That's bravery. You stand there. You don't walk to the angel of death and give it all up to him. No, you stand, you hold your ground, and you wait for him to come claim you when your time is up. But until then, you enjoy the moment, my friend. Thank you very much.